restaurant right on the beach there. And he mentioned that because the banana farms upstream many of them had begun to implement sustainable practices starting a couple of decades before, that the reef was starting to come back to life. So the reef almost died.
Wow.
And there were no
So
fish.
sad.
Yes, there were no fish. I mean, it was really bad shape. And he grew up there as a kid, and he saw with his own eyes the reef go to the brink of death, and then he saw it come back. And what he said to us when we interviewed him was, I know the banana plantations are finally doing things the right way because the reef has come back to life. We're beginning to see marine life coming back. All these creatures that we thought were gone are coming back. So, you know, it's important to remember again, and this is to bring it back to surfing and meditation, really. It's one of the things that I feel is like the key to the world healing. If all of us, every single person in the world, really could cultivate and realize the awareness of our interdependence with each other and also with nature, I really believe that is the foundation from which we can build a much more beautiful, equitable, and healthy world. You know, every time you take a sip of water, a sip of tea, or, you know, eat something, if you really think about where did it come from and who grew this food and how was it grown and how does that impact the local ecosystem, that's what colonialism took away from us. It took away that awareness of interdependence. And that's why I think our society is so ill. And that's why our planet is also so ill.
Well, let's talk about that, because we're in this time now, right, between COVID and all the protests. One might initially think, oh, Rainforest Alliance has nothing to do with it. Climate change, you know, is a separate thing. But we are having a greater understanding of how all those things are interconnected. And then also, let's talk about environmental racism, you know, the communities that get affected by our disharmonious relationship to nature and our planet always tends to affect, you know, some communities worse than other communities.
I think so many of our most heartbreaking and distressing problems are, again, symptoms of broken connection. So, you know, let's talk about, first of all, environmental racism. I think I really want to give a shout out to the younger generation of climate activists, because they have done so much to shake up the kind of old guard of environmental culture, environmentalist culture, and to point out that environmental conservation is not and cannot be treated as separate from racial injustice, especially here in the United States. And it doesn't, you know, you don't have to be an investigative journalist to look around and look at where toxic brown sites are, for example, or look at which neighborhoods are chosen for sites for oil drilling or for landfills or any of those things.
Or how neighborhoods even get shaped, like how the sides
get shaped. Highways, for example. So I think now there is a much better general understanding of how environmental destruction and racism interface. And, you know, over the past decade and a half, I think we've seen just a really vibrant environmental justice movement form and become, I think, much, you know, at the forefront. They're now at the forefront of the environmental movement worldwide. And that's been a really beautiful thing to behold. And I think what's important to remember is, you know, in the world of what we do at the Rainforest Alliance, which is really sustainable development, let's call it, you know, for lack of a better term, sustainable development, right? And I'm speaking now as myself, not as the Rainforest Alliance official position. But in my observation, a lot of the environmental crises that we're seeing around the world are also a direct result of that broken connection. And they are systems that were built specifically for the purpose of breaking that connection, to maximize profit. So colonialism, one of the biggest drivers of colonialism, obviously, was economic. And, you know, British and Dutch and Spanish and Portuguese, all of those European colonial powers, they set out to create huge production landscapes far away from where they lived. So they went to Kenya, for example, and cut down most of the forest and created tea monoculture. They did the same thing in India. They did the same thing in Sri Lanka, for example. And by doing that, they basically located offshore all of the environmental destruction and the human suffering required to make a cheap and plentiful product that they can enjoy, and not have to look at what was really involved, not have to see how the sausage is made. So,
and also fostering this kind of single product, single crop economy.
Yes, single crop economy. And what happens is, what happened is all of those systems are still very much in effect. It's how our entire global economy is organized. And people, a very, very small number of people in Europe and the United States are profiting immensely, not only from the trade of very cheaply produced goods, but also from trading on the prices and the future prices of those goods. So they're making millions and billions off of futures and derivatives and all of that, all of those complicated financial mechanisms. What that looks like on the ground, I'll tell you a little story. Last year, I went to Kenya with my team. We were making a series of videos to kind of demonstrate the success of a project that the Rainforest Alliance undertook in partnership with 2 local organizations in Kenya. And it was basically to help transition Kenya's tea industry to renewable energy. So we went to go visit a couple of smallholder tea factories. These are places where 200 to 400 smallholders might go, and they bring their tea leaves to get weighed. They get paid. The tea leaves are dried and withered in the factories and then brought to the market in Mombasa for international trading. Now, when we went to the factories, one of the aspects of the project was to change the boilers that are used to wither and dry the tea to boilers to change the fuel from wood to agricultural waste briquettes. So we went to go look at these boilers. Each tea factory had either 1 or 2 boilers. Okay, the boiler was the size of my living room, or the size of a school bus, let's say. It was just this ginormous boiler. You can't even imagine. It was so hot and it was crazy. Located on the tea factory grounds were mountains of wood, firewood. Kenya is just starting to emerge from a national deforestation crisis where its forest cover went down to 2%.
Oh my God.
2% in a water scarce country. So they're having droughts. It's affecting the whole population. And the government has really been, they put a ban on deforestation in native forests, and they've really been working to try to transition the economy. Anyway, just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem. So in Kenya, there are probably 600 smallholder tea factories. So each tea factory has 1 or 2 of these giant wood boilers. Each boiler, they consume, I can't even give you a number that would make the scale comprehensible, but just if you looked around, acres and acres and acres stacked with wood that was only going to last 3 months.
Oh my God.
And I asked, well, why don't you just change the boilers, you know? And they said, well, we can't change like changing one boiler would cost $25,000 to $50,000 to change to, you know. And I asked, well, why do you use wood fired boilers if you're in the middle of a deforestation crisis? This is what they told me. These are the boilers that the English colonists brought over in the 40s and the 60s, 1940s, 1960s. So they were still using the same boilers, but because they're smallholders who are basically a prisoner of a single export or very small number of exports in their economy, they didn't have enough money to invest in a new boiler. So the best that we could do in collaboration with these local groups on the ground was at least try to do some harm reduction and change over the fuel. And I think the maximum that we could do is 30% renewable energy briquettes. Beyond that, the boilers just don't work anymore. So that's what we're doing. We're sort of doing harm reduction on
this direct connection of colonial systems. But I mean, the reason for the New World is also a direct legacy of that. So when we're talking about this moment with Black Lives Matter and systemic racism, and we look also to that environmental, if we talk about environmentalism and the root of that being a lot of it being these kind of single crop agricultural systems that rape lands, and not just the land, but everything that is involved with that, labor and the indigenous communities. And to see the connection between like slavery and all the economies that built the New World, that they were then able to stand on their own, and the legacy of that and how it's destroyed the lives of people, our civilization, and our environment.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that here in the Americas, in the Caribbean, South America, Brazil especially, and here in the United States, that the enslavement of people from West Africa was this sort of, it was the illogical extreme, the psychotic extreme, the psychotic conclusion of the profit motive. And so within the context of the tobacco and the cotton economies in the southern United States, for example, I just marvel at, how a person could have even come up with the idea of, obviously slavery had existed in many incarnations before American slavery, but to, I guess, replicate it at this scale, and who had the idea to do that, and what is the mindset or the sociopathic kind of mentality that would lead a group of people, an entire society, to co-sign this and then to implement it, and to implement it with such brutal and cruel efficiency. It's really,
just think about the transport alone. That's a long way away. Like that drive has, in addition to
people dedicated their lives
taking
and
human beings outside, of course they didn't see them as humans, and that was the problem, part of the problem. But then also just the great lengths that it took to do what they did over so many centuries. It's really...
Yeah, I actually feel that they very much understood them to be humans, but that they didn't care. And that they really just felt that, we have an advantage here. And so what if they're human? We will make them less than human so that we can have what we want to have, and have our inexpensive tea and have our inexpensive cotton. And, all of this, we're in a moment right now that it's so... we spoke about this the other day, and why I think many of us are feeling the need to really go to the water more often, especially now. But we're in this moment that is of transformation that is so hideous and painful and so exhilarating at the same time. And to me, all I can think